The Dementors have returned.
We were bringing them back after the third film, Prisoner of Azkaban, so we had to incorporate some new ideas that David Yates had on how he wanted them to appear and act in the film.
David, in this instance, wanted them to be more physical, and they seemed a little more spectral in the previous movie.
And that gave us a big challenge there. They wanted to be able to see the bone through the cloth and actually see the wraps of cloth and actually understand that there's a skeleton underneath it. We had to make the tail longer. We had to change the cloth around. So they actually sent us physical maquettes of the Dementor with the redesigns on it. And then we further took that and really developed textures and things like that on top, because that's a little hard to get with the maquettes. That's kind of where we take off and start doing some more of our creative work.
There was a definite design change, but also a sort of a change in how the Dementors would behave. One of the really important things with them is, obviously getting their sense of violence in them.
The Dementors are more dynamic, they're faster than before, where in the past they were really just kind of ominous and very slow. This time, they can come out and attack.
It's funny with the Dementor, they don't have a face. They don't even have lips. They're just this completely black, dark, covered up creature. So it's a real challenge to try and to get some features to show up in that model, because they have to look menacing, they have to look threatening, and in so many of these shots the head is just a black ball. So we did do some tricks with the interior of the mouth.
There's an opening now for the mouth, so you actually can kind of see into the mouth. And at one point we were talking about sucking some eyeballs in there, but that kind of went away. So they're basically faceless.
There's a little bit of subtle movement in the face to give them a little bit more character and personality.
The big thing was that the Dementors actually have the ability to have their cloth move and undulate and almost act as appendages. As the Dementor moves around, you can see the pieces of cloth almost have a mind of its own and take control almost like fingers or hands, and be able to come in and grab Harry, or to wrap around his arm, for example. So part of it is the adjustment of how the cloth could flow, and then the other part is kind of integrating all of that, rendering it and getting it to look like a deteriorated fabric.
They needed to look more weather-beaten, more destroyed. We kept tearing the cloth a little bit more, putting more worn spots on the cloth, more rips, more tattered edges. Because they're covered up, because you don't see much of their body, we really did pay a lot of attention to the quality and look of all of that cloth.
There's a sequence where the Dementor actually picks up Harry and shoves him up against the wall. So there's a few shots where the Dementor actually has him by the neck and he's holding him up on the wall. So that's sort of the tightest interaction that we have with them.
The interaction with the character this close to camera, that's always a little bit tricky to do. Our animators were really great about keying off of Harry's movements, the actor's movements in the plate, to try and keep that hand attached to the neck.
They actually just choreographed that on set. They kind of stuck him up on a rig that mounted Harry from behind onto the wall, and he just kind of acted like he was being choked. Much of the work came afterwards, where we had to very tightly match move Harry's neck and chin and then put the Dementor hand onto that.
It was actually fun to get to revisit these characters, because I didn't work on that film that the Dementors appeared in. So they were one of the creatures that I always really liked, so I was glad to see them come back.
The Grimmauld playset is fantastic.
It's a typical 18th century Georgian square in London, terraced houses. In that sense, it's typical. What is very untypical, everything inside is strangely distorted, compressed in width or length, exaggerated in height.
Well, the house is the ancestral home of Sirius Black, and he's hiding out here.
What? No hello for me?
The whole feeling of it is of enclosure, and that's why Stuart designed the sets with very high ceilings, and lots of the windows are mirrored to give another effect of enclosure you can't see out.
It's incredibly decayed, incredibly dusty. The woodwork is all black.
As you come in, the walls of the hall are all a dark grey silk, which is printed with a big sort of damask pattern. We like using silk on the walls because it's easy to distress. It looks good if it's aged. The floor of the hall is a tessellated tile effect in black and white, but much aged down. Mira, the head of graphics, designed the tapestry very much with J.K. Rowling.
In the book, there are only a handful of names on the Black family tree, but when you bring it to film, you actually have to visualize it. So I called Jo and said, Jo, we need some more information. Can you help us? 15 minutes later, she faxed down a copy of the Black family tree, which went back 4 or 5 generations, had 75, 100 names on it, and such is the depth of her knowledge that she's able to pull that out like that.
And we had it painted on specially woven tapestry fabric, so it is all painted, and just small areas of it will be visual effects.
My mother did that when I ran away. Charming woman. I was 16.
For the kitchen, I've been collecting stuff for it over the months that I've been working on the film, mostly at auctions. The 2 big dresses behind me with the china was one way of giving the feeling of an old ancestral home, and otherwise sort of touches of wizardry like cauldrons hanging up from the ceiling. The bedroom is at the top of the house, also tall and narrow with mirrored windows. I wanted to accentuate the height by having striped fabrics there. I then found one bed in an auction. We made old lace pillowcases and dyed them a grubby grey. It's very gloomy and very, very strange. Not the room you'd like to spend the night in.
It's just got the most amazing atmosphere, and it's brilliant. It's so cool. I'd love to live there if we could take, like, the skulls out of it.
Ah, Tonks. How do we get a duckbill and a pig snout onto this lovely lady's face? We start by shooting the plate or the shot clean, and she's got these little dots all over her face. Those dots are there so that we can track our CG or computer-generated model onto it. Those dots help us because, for example, we place them in places such as here and here that we know don't move. So we have a standard anchor point to kind of bring our model onto her. So she does her performance of the scrunched up nose and her blown out face like that, and then we take that, and then we take her head, and we do something called scanning it. So we take a laser, and then we plot all the points into the computer, and we generate a CG model of her face. The next thing we do is go in there and take that face and stretch it out so it has a duckbill on there. It's a slow sort of transformation. It's got to come from somewhere, which is the tricky bit. And there's the little pig snout popping out like that as well. Once we get that, we do the next step, which is paint it. So we develop a shader that looks like human skin. And then once we have all of this done, we track our CG model onto the face of the actress with the animation in there. The next thing is that we start matting out or cutting out the bits of the actress that we want to keep, and then the silvery gray areas are the ones that are going to be CG. And then finally, the last little bit is we clean everything up, and we make it look real. It's a fun little shot. It's one of our faves. It's absolutely great.
Three, two, one, background action!
The Ministry of Magic, which Jo created in the 5th book, which is a great new universe. We've never seen it in any of the previous Harry Potter films. There's a sort of 1950s bureaucratic, old-fashioned vibe to the Ministry of Magic, something that's quite quaint and British and not very efficient, but very charming.
We thought it would be fun to, in the first instance, to place it beneath the Muggle ministries. So we went to Whitehall and we went to the Ministry of Defence and in that area in there and thought it would be terrific if there was this parallel universe underneath this very familiar one.
I've never used a visitor's entrance before. This should be fun.
Stuart Craig came up with this notion that it was a series of tunnels, basically, because we both got intrigued by the underground system.
We researched early underground stations, the Metropolitan line, the old Piccadilly line, and there are remnants of those early underground systems that still survive. So we went and we had a look and discovered that the facades on the street were beautiful classical architecture, but rendered in ceramic tile. And then as we went inside, there were remnants also of this Victorian ceramic tile, but all with this incredible classical decoration.
So that was Stuart's inspiration for the Ministry of Magic. All these reflective tiles, all these odd little shapes, round circular shapes. And so it's very British. So that's why it kind of chimes, I think.
This set is actually, I would say that in the last sort of 6 years, this is the best set we've had.
So we literally built this, kind of mini city underground. I mean, we built a little bit of it physically and then extended it endlessly with computer-generated extensions.
This is the original plate with green screens inserted, where we're going to have to then take this and extend it outwards and upwards.
You're trying to create something that is actually not there in reality. The whole part of the set is for real. Up to about here is real. That's all real, and beyond there is CG. In the other side of the atrium, we've got a whole extension. So our extension spreads up from here. These top two offices are done within the computer. This arch and everything beyond it is done in the computer.
You've got the big golden wizard in the distance and the repeating offices all the way back. These offices go all the way up, these big columns, and it's basically the classic sort of repeat English office where everybody's just stamping memos and typing on old typewriters, and just the business of wizarding going on endlessly.
The cactus was great fun. I mean, doing things like that are great because they're such self-contained little things, and it's great if you have a radio-controlled object that you give to an actor, because then you can work with the actor. You know, and Matt was great at getting the hang of what this thing could do and playing off it, because it's a stage prop. And we built this cactus, and we wanted it to sort of be able to suddenly turn around and look aggressive, or snuggle into him and look pathetic, or whatever it had to be. It also had to be able to swell slightly because it had to be able to explode, you know, to throw pus about the room. And so not only did we have the cactus, we had the shriveled cactus, which looked very sad and shook, which was a sort of flaccid, horrible thing, for after it had exploded. That kind of thing in the middle of a very long shoot is a fun, entertaining thing to make. I don't know why, but there's something stupid and hysterical about a cactus that's looking at you.
The most endearing thing about them all is they corpse quite a bit. And by corpsing, what I mean is they just get the giggles.
The funniest things are when Rupert starts corpsing, because he's less prone to it now than he was when he was younger, but there are times where he just can't help it.
I've got a real problem this year, actually. Worse than any. I mean, I was bad on the second film, and Chris Columbus had to take me aside and sort of give me a few words. But it's quite early on. David hasn't really said anything yet. He's sort of laughing it off at the moment, but I don't know how long that'll last.
But he's such an infectious laugh as well. As soon as he goes, I fall to pieces. I'm gone. Just go. There was one scene where we're supposed to be terrified of what's on the other side of this wall. They're found us, they're coming to get us. And I can see Rupert laughing in the mirror, and I can see him, and I can hear him sniggering in my ear. And then that set me off, and then I set everyone else, and it's so difficult to get that scene going.
We'll be doing a scene, it could be quite a serious scene, and he's in the frame, and Rupert will start giggling, and he'll pretend he isn't giggling. He'll try and ignore the fact that he's gone.
I have to do about 4 or 5 takes just because I just can't keep a straight face. So, yeah, I blame Rupert.
The magical paper swallow is essentially a piece of magical origami which comes to life and flies around the room and is then savagely dispatched by Umbridge when she makes her entrance into the classroom.
Good morning, children.
The basic idea behind this was that the swallow would evolve throughout the shot, that it would start as a simple paper aeroplane, develop quite complex features, and then get better and better at flying and become more and more subtle and beautiful in its movements. What was actually shot is just a little piece of paper dangling from a string. And this gives the actors something to actually look at, so they're not all just staring into different places in space. And we had to work out how to turn this into a digital model that could also animate. And then once you've done that, you're back into the process of lighting and rendering and shading and texturing, giving it all of the things that make it feel real. If you look at this very, very close up, you can see that it's made from proper Hogwarts exercise paper, complete with lines and margins and everything. It has little folds and creases that suggest that it's been folded by somebody's hands or fingers. And then finally, we set fire to the thing. And that's quite a complex piece of visual effects animation. And we shot references of burning paper, of embers and ashes and little sparks and things. And a very subtle amount of smoke is added as well. So it's a beautiful little self-contained shot.
Professor Umbridge is the new Defence Against the Dark Arts. She's evil in a whole new way, I like to say. She's not your typical Snape evil. She's more of your Voldemort evil. She comes along and she's not very nice.
She doesn't want them to be doing any spells that she thinks are dangerous. Also, she's a woman who isn't involved with children. To her mind, they're 5 years old.
She only teaches us theory. So in these classes, she tells you how to do the spells, but you're not allowed to do them.
It's a very patronising thing, but not in her mind, and just has to teach them to do things in a safe atmosphere. I mean, it's health and safety gone bloody mad. She believes that that's the way forward, that everything's squeaky, squeaky clean. No mess, no argument, no thinking. Bottom line.
Professor Umbridge is probably the most unlikely looking Defence Against the Dark Arts teacher of the lot. She wears pink, she has permed hair, she's rather short. Just generally doesn't look like she could take on anything.
I wanted her to be soft, to have a warmth to her look, because she's quite hard.
You know, deep down, you deserve to be punished, don't you, Mr. Potter?
She has the appearance of being something that she is not.
She is that sort of teacher who smiles on the surface, seems very friendly, but will dig the knife in. She's all about order and control, about defining the world according to her rules.
We've had a lot of fun finding, I would probably imagine 300 million types of fabric. I haven't worn much pink before, but the alarming thing is I'm rather getting to like them now. So we've had a lot of fun with it. And the shape, little round woolly person, who's just not very nice. As you can see here, there's a lot of pink and a lot of plates with pussycats on them. And those pussycats speak and purr and things like that. And they're little spies as well for her.
She has lots of collector's plates with pictures of cats on them, the sort of thing you might see in somebody's home. But of course, this being the magical world of Harry Potter, there are moving pictures of cats. And the cats convey part of Umbridge's personality. We started with a bit of blue or green paint. Then we shot film of cats on a separate stage, doing various different things.
We had a fantastic session with the second unit filming kittens dressed in cardigans, jackets, hats, in all sorts of situations, which will be played onto the plates.
So we would receive these big charts showing which cat went exactly where, and they all have different personalities and they all do different kinds of things. The cat's performances, which you'd think that wouldn't be an issue, but it was quite a challenge to make sure you pick just the right bit of footage of the cat to go into the shot at the right time.
It is the view of the Ministry that a theoretical knowledge will be sufficient to get you through your examinations, which, after all, is what school is all about.
Dolores Umbridge is a new character in this film. She's sent to teach there, but of course will not allow them to have their wands or anything like that. She just wants them to be little children who don't touch anything or do anything.
Her classroom, we decided, since she doesn't teach them anything at all, that we wouldn't have any decoration in it. So it was just the desks, the blackboard and her desk. And then you go up the stairs and you go into her room, which is completely as we've never seen it before. The walls are tinted pink, a painted pink Aubusson-style carpet.
It's a great contrast to everything that we had previously established. We do have colour in the magical world, but it tends to be colours kind of emotionally associated with the mystical, the magical, I think, really. So it's brilliant that Jo Rowling's choice for her is this strident sort of pastel pink.
There was much discussion about the precise shade of pink and much testing of how it would photograph.
We just took it, I hope, to a theatrical extreme. It isn't just the plates. There's a fantastic amount of lace. The furniture, if anything, rather than belie her character, sort of gives you a hint of what lies beneath, in that it's this curvy kind of French-style furniture.
We decided that we hadn't had French furniture before, and since it was spiky and rather aggressive, it would suit her character.
It was, as you can imagine, a lot of preparation, a lot of discussion, a lot of thought in that one set. And an awful lot of pink, absolutely.
Imelda Staunton loved it, felt very much at home there, which was great for us.
It's a wonderful world to have inhabited for the time it took us to make this film. You know, there are a lot of bad characters in films that, they're always in black and evil and stuff. And of course, she's absolutely the antithesis of that and looks so homely and lovely and loving, but not at all.
The Thestral sort of began life in the art department in London, the Creature Shop. They mocked up the design, built a maquette, even a full-size version. And for us, it was really trying to figure out their sort of character and personality. And for Thestrals, even though their appearance is sort of horrific in a way, in reality, they're a very sort of graceful and majestic, powerful and proud creature.
They really wanted it to feel kind of fleshy and make sure that the skin was sliding across the bones, and you can't really show that in a maquette.
There's always that last little bit of work that has to be done on the CG end. With this Thestral, it was basically a living skeleton, and most animals, by the time they get into that shape, aren't walking around, certainly not flying around, so we had to be a little more creative with our reference.
For the form of the Thestral and guiding us on what the bone structures and muscles should be doing, we mostly used horses. Because it's a flying horse, we also then went and got some bird reference as well. One of the things that we really wanted to get was sort of, if you watch horses, they kind of sit there and they twitch every so often, or little muscles go off and the skin jiggles a little bit.
As the animator moves the Thestral's leg up, there's a certain amount of muscles which get activated to do that movement.
So we go through and animate those as shapes that are driven by the joints, that are driven by the animators. So even as an animator's making a simple walk cycle, all of the muscles are firing when they should, the muscles are flexing as they should, and the skin that's riding over the surface of those muscles is responding as it should.
The forest sequence, we're introduced to a baby Thestral, which was an idea that David Yates had because he wanted to show that these were living creatures that bred and ate, and they weren't some kind of skeletal, ghostly thing. They were real and living. Luna's gonna throw him a piece of meat that he'll sort of devour really hungrily, and we found reference of different animals eating for the baby, vultures, lions, hyenas, and really you kind of study and then interpolate. You look at the design and the mood of the shot and try to find something that's close, but then adapt it into what it needs to be.
The wings are actually mostly based off of bats. They actually took some extremely high-resolution photos for us of bat wings. They got a bat in and they moved its wings around, and in this case they're quite tight. And so if the wing opens, it stretches, and when it closes, they tighten up.
We started off with doing some wing simulations to make sure that we have a thin layer for the wings that would, as he flies, would kind of undulate and flap with the wind.
We see a shot where they unfold the wings, and there's a sort of an elegance to them that sort of belies their physical appearance in some respects.
It's J.K. Rowling's world, and You know, a horse, flying horse, even as skinny as these things are, they might need wings a little bit bigger than we've given them here to get off the ground. But that's where the magic comes in.
Since we're in the Hogshead pub, we have an animatronic Hogshead. Originally, David said to us that they wanted to have 3 wolf's heads in the tavern, and could I quote on them? And then they said they'd probably CG them. And then somebody decided, because it was called the Hog's Head, that there wasn't any point in having wolf's heads in there, and shouldn't there be a Hog's Head? But don't worry about it, it'll be CG. But we do want you to sculpt one, because we want a static one. So we sculpted it, and then it became sort of rather obvious, I felt, that since we'd sculpted it, and since this thing is mounted on the wall, and has actually a very limited range of movements anyway, why on earth were we spending money CGing it when we could actually just build it? And in fact, we built it. It's an animatronic built into the wall, operated by guys behind the wall with some radio control doing the eyes, and David loved it.
Lovely spot.
The moment where Neville discovers the Room of Requirements. He's wandering down one of the corridors in Hogwarts, and he walks past, and there's a little tiny pattern begins to appear in the wall behind him, just out of his field of vision. But he can tell that something's happening, and as he turns round, the door begins to reveal itself. This shot went through quite a number of different design stages. We had various ideas with lots of light spilling out of the wall. We had ideas where the blocks were rotating around to reveal the door was hidden on the rear side of the blocks of stone. But quite late on, we came up with this idea of the door carving itself into the walls. And so it progressively reveals itself as a relief pattern. And we added things like dust falls, falling off it, and then eventually the final layer of dust is blown away to reveal the underlying texture of the door. The door sinks back into the wall, revealing its archway, and then swings open and admits Neville to the Room of Requirements.
You've done it, Neville. You found the Room of Requirement.
On the day, it's just a blue screen. So we have to remove that blue. We have to restore back the wall so that there's nothing there, that it's just a flat wall to begin with. And then we have to progressively reveal our magical door. You feel like there's some mechanism at work, but it's a magical mechanism. But at the same time, it's very much part of the fabric of the whole universe. It doesn't just pop out and grandstand.
The Room of Requirement is the room which is actually nothing to start off with until you require something, and then it becomes what you require.
So, say you really needed the toilet.
Charming, Ronald.
Joe describes it as having cushions and books, and so we have given it a kind of neutral state, and its neutral empty state when they first find it is that it is mirrored, and that seemed exciting photographically, but also appropriate in that it kind of reflected you and your need back to yourself. But it is a very, very difficult set to photograph and to light.
Stuart's idea was to put the mirrors all around the room, and very quickly we realized, that there are no way to avoid reflections.
So we had weeks and weeks of meetings about how practical it was to shoot in this environment. So we kind of figured out a way of how we could achieve it. And with CG and visual effects, we're able to take out the reflections that we see. And we went for this very reflective, unusual, magical design, which just feels quite beautiful.
I'm okay.
It was just stifling heat, and it was quite good though, because we were in there doing all this stuff that was supposed to be really physical, like we've been training and working for hours, which was great, because by the time they cut to us, we were all out of breath and sweating anyway, so it sort of worked in the end. Maybe it was intentional.
It just looks like there should be a fight going on in there, some sort of underground fight club in Hogwarts. It's a really, really atmospheric set, and the lighting has to be perfect.
We invented this underfloor lighting system where he could actually light from underneath grills on the floor, and that lighting is not perceptible at all. It was for a time in that it lit, in a rather unfortunate way, the soles of people's shoes. So we covered the soles of their shoes with black velvet.
The only annoying thing is the floor is, it's like a special material, so you keep having to wear these sort of blue shoe covers, and that was a bit of a hassle.
So a professional getting his shoes on.
Because every time you went in there, if you didn't have the things on your feet, you'd leave footmarks everywhere, and it wouldn't feel magical anymore. It just felt like you walked all over the floor.
Those wishing to join the Inquisitorial Squad for extra credit may sign up in the High Inquisitor's office.
The Inquisitorial Squad have a mission to find out what exactly the goody-goodies have been up to. They have started their own army, as they have named it themselves, and it is up to me and my various squad to find out where exactly this is all taking place and what's happening to do with it, really. I like the idea of two gangs going at it, so to speak.
It's quite bizarre because you get two very distinct factions. I mean, you always get the tension between the Slytherins and the Gryffindors, and that's present through all the films and all the books. But here, Umbridge sort of really uses it, really sort of harnesses it for her own means, and they're sort of prowling around, and they're there when the Room of Requirement is broken into. I think that's quite interesting, how it sort of develops the tension between the two houses, and there's more hostility between the two of them, because they really are just working for Umbridge in that sense.
Caught this one trying to help the Weasley girl.
I mean, I think she discovers with Malfoy that she has a little posse that she can gather up to help, and they do it quite well.
Malfoy's always keen to go against whatever Potter is up to, so he takes great pleasure, along with my great goons, in joining her Inquisitorial Squad. Admittedly, ours is slightly weaker than the Dumbledore's army, but nevertheless, we give it a fair try.
Everybody's talking about the kiss.
The kiss. Kiss.
The kiss was quite, you know, it was fun.
It was a great scene. I really enjoyed it. I was so nervous before. I think Daniel was as well.
Because we were both nervous, and we both knew we were nervous, it made it a lot easier, if you know what I mean, because we both knew how we felt and we were both a bit embarrassed.
You just let yourselves go, completely relax.
I made sure that the set was closed and there was minimal people inside, and they sort of dimmed the lights. I don't know if it was so it would be less intimidating or if it was going to be more romantic.
So I think my glasses hit you that time, sorry. It's quite a clinical sort of thing, because you sort of be in the kissing position and someone will say, Dan, move to your right. All right. And you'll sort of do that. And it's just a very odd thing to do.
When I say now, you'll just start to kiss on the other side. So you'll just swivel around, yeah?
I mean, it would be a nightmare if you're actually kissing someone and someone said, move to your left. It would be bizarre.
Roll camera, please.
It was a bit awkward at the beginning, but, you know, the more we did it, the more we just got used to it, and it was fine. It's fine now.
I know, it's cool now, and it's like we're really cool.
It's a very odd thing to watch, because it's kind of like watching your own children, but it's not. But you still feel a great sort of paternal instinct.
Good night to Dan and Katie. Well done, guys.
Much of the crew has been on the film since Dan was 10, 11 years old, and to see him now going through this romantic moment was rather beautiful and wonderful, but at the same time you felt like you shouldn't be in the room watching.
That's a huge moment, actually. I think that a lot of girls especially will be waiting for that moment.
It was actually great. It was really, really cool. And I'm sure, you know, anyone who's seen the film will agree that Katie's quite beautiful, so I felt very privileged, really.
Well, I've kissed you enough today, but I thought that's a...
Daniel is a very good kisser. Thank God.
And well done, we've done it now. It's done. There we go.
Nasty breath standing there as bold as brass. Harry Potter, the boy who stopped the Dark Lord.
Kreacher is a house elf, and whereas Dobby was the house elf you loved, Kreacher is the house elf you hate.
Such an honor it is.
Kreacher was wanted to be, from the very beginning, a much more real person. Dobby was a humorous, slightly cartoon, slightly exaggerated personality. Whereas Kreacher, the brief really was, whatever we do, don't go off into fantasy. You know, it's got to feel like a disgusting old, unwashed old man whose skin has never seen the sun. You know, you don't want to think what his clothing's like. And so that was really our brief. It was to preserve the reality of it. So when we cast him up, we spent a long time trying to find the right translucent silicone that we could artwork that gave that clammy quality. You know, you want to produce a model that you don't want to touch. If the model, without even moving, produces an element of disgust, you're winning.
Because he is a fully CG sort of creature on screen. There's really nothing to really base his performance on. To have someone who's a house elf with large monkey-like arms that drag on the ground, that's something that gave these guys a lot of opportunity to try and get in there and get in the head of creature. This is one of the reference photographs that we took, and there's Tim Burke, our visual effects supervisor, and right next to him is our maquette. So we use this maquette as a lineup, so the camera crew has something that they can line up their camera to. And also the actors are standing on the sides going, oh, that's where his head is, and that's how they can match their eye lines. The other things that we do, we've got to take our CG model, make it move, which is animate it, and then put it into the scene. We also have to light it. So the advantage of having the maquette there on set is that we're able to see and look and go, ah, that's where the light's coming from, so we can match the same lighting as on the set. We also do other things, for example, Creature's little tunic there. And it seems kind of silly, but we walk around and we have it moving and we capture it on camera as well. And what that gives our artists the ability to see how the cloth moves and also how it's lit in the environment.
We wanted to find some reference of performance. So David cast an actor called Timothy Bateson, who we've shot probably 2 or 3 times now to capture different performances of who Creature is and delivery of lines. Because Creature has dialogue, we wanted to capture some facial reference of how those lines were delivered. And Timothy gave us several different performances of which David made selects. And from there, we've taken that performance reference and developed that into our 3D Creature. So at the end of the day, you're seeing the lines delivered by Timothy Bateson, but spoken by Creature.
Of course, Master.
Well, Azkaban is in the middle of the North Sea. We had a notion early on that it would be really interesting to literally have this kind of jutting piece of rock on a waterfall, and we researched and got pictures of all the world's famous waterfalls, Iguazu and Victoria Falls, and made a composite image of Azkaban perched on this rock on the edge of a waterfall. And then for a while we played with that and tried to justify the waterfall. Well, how can a waterfall exist in the middle of the North Sea? Well, it could be a kind of sinkhole. It could be a circular hole.
This sequence is actually quite small for us. There's only about 4 or 5 shots in the sequence.
I mean, we had seconds, really, to establish this, and that was all thought to be too complicated.
The final designs just ended with, it's basically kind of a man-made island out in the middle of the ocean. There's no real indication as to exactly where it is.
We took the architecture, which is a triangle. It's a very, very strong, fortified shape, like the Pentagon, but 3-sided, but much more huge and forbidding and aggressive and so on. So we took that very strong shape and sat it on an outcrop of rock.
It's kind of a pyramidal base out in the water so that, you know, there's big waves crashing into the side of it.
I think the biggest waves ever recorded are probably some 70, 80 feet high. Well, our waves are 250 feet high, you know, so it's the germ of a good idea, exaggerated and exaggerated.
X338, take 1. Okay, camera, and action.
The mirror was very tricky because we had to see the mirror on the wall in the unbroken stage. Then we had to see the mirror break but stay on the wall. And then we had to see the mirror fall off the wall on cue. And then we had to see the wall blow in with all the kids standing in front of it. And rather than use explosives in a situation like that, we use air mortars and literally blow it out with high-pressure compressed air. There's lots of little tricks to that. For instance, instead of using stone or plaster, which the they used to build the sets with, we use cork because it's light enough not to hurt anybody, but it's heavy enough to fly through the air when you blow it up with air or explosive. And it looks real when it breaks. It looks exactly like stone would, so you can colour it, you can darken it down or lighten it up if you need to. The mirror was plexiglass. We had it laser cut to a predetermined break pattern. We glued onto the back of each broken piece a little peg which plugged into a little hole in the wall. And on cue, we pushed all the little plugs forward, so it pushed all the bits of mirror off the wall, all the mirror falls, but the holes that the plugs were in are all covered with little bits of wall. You don't want to put the director in the situation of having to do it a number of times because something didn't quite work. So to get it all working absolutely perfectly is, to me, the art of what it's all about.
Well, he's an obvious challenge because he is 16 feet tall, and there aren't very many people around we can find that are 16 feet tall and can act. He's a very difficult character to realise.
In the very beginning, we shot live-action actor Tony Maudsley, and we motion captured his performance. Capturing a performance involves placing markers all over an actor's body. And cameras pick up those markers, and sensors figure out where those markers are in three-dimensional space. That's captured by a computer software package and translated onto a skeletal rig in the computer and replicates that actor's motion in 3D space inside a computer. The director saw Tony's performance, loved the spirit of it, but pretty much told us not to be slaves to that actual data and to go ahead and use the spirit of it and build on that to see where we could go.
Robbie, that is not polite.
There's this really hilarious scene where Grawp picks Hermione up.
We have bits of Grawp made out of foam rubber, which we can put onto armatures and stands, and the actors can interact with that. On set, Rupert ran up with a stick, but instead of hitting Grawp's leg, he's hitting a giant blue polyurethane version of Grawp's leg, but that gives him something to actually see and actually hit. And also, it's a guide for us, because we know where Grawp's leg is meant to be.
Grawpy!
That's one of my favourite scenes so far, actually, because I get to do a little stunt. Ron feels a bit, he wants to be the hero sort of thing and tries to beat up the giant. So he grabs his leg and I get kicked off, which was my little stunt.
And there's Ron in vain on the floor trying to save her. It's really sweet. It's a really sweet scene.
The Weasley Twins fireworks sequence was, in some ways, the most fun, free, and exciting part of working on the film.
We felt it was absolutely necessary that we should have a fireworks display. So John Richardson, our special effects supervisor, got in a load of really good fireworks.
We laid on a little firework display out on the back lot here at Leavesden, which we filmed, and it gave the CGI guys some sort of real elements to work with.
We'd have the fireworks themselves as a reference, and then we'd try and copy what a real firework is actually doing, so it's kind of speed, how much it spreads, the pattern changes that happen over time. And then we'd have those as particular fireworks that we could place. We ended up with a library of fireworks that we could lay out in each shot.
As things went along, the fireworks became more like characters, and so there became more of a magical component, and that fireworks started to do things that in our research we found fireworks can't do. So they last longer, or they may fly in ways that normal fireworks couldn't or shouldn't. But in grounding ourselves in the firm basis of real fireworks, we didn't stray so far that the audience will question too much what they're seeing.
3, 2, 1, go!
The on-set shooting crews and actors had to know what was coming, how to respond.
I felt it was quite important to have a lot of lighting in that set that would correspond with the fireworks that we were going to add later. A certain selection of lights would be going off, hitting blue, yellow, red, orange. So we did a lot of pre-planning with how the lighting design worked, and that was really useful. It helped the actors immensely, I think, just to feel that something magical was happening.
The scene up here is where Umbridge is confronting her first magical Weasley firework. We actually called this the magical firework because it's very much character driven. It actually hangs in front of her face The next key shot in the fireworks sequence is when the Weasley twins themselves enter.
The roof was completely set lighting up there, and we had to take all the set lighting off and replace it with a CG roof extension. We had to work with the look of the magic ceiling, but initially we were quite worried about the fireworks not looking so impressive over a bright sky, so we came up with the idea when the fireworks go off, the ceiling that's actually there is lit and the magic ceiling goes away.
So this was the shot we used to suddenly pull the curtain up, pull the wooden sky in, and darken the whole room down, because we now need to go into kind of a darker fireworks show atmosphere. So one of the last big moments within the Great Hall is the fireworks dragon, loosely based on a Chinese New Year's dragon in both its motion and sort of the crazy features on its face. There's nothing better than having a well-directed, edited sequence to go put your work in, because once you see it in a good movie, it's all good.
We've got the shots of the Weasley twins flying out through the door. We've got 90-odd proclamations hung on the wall over a big area of width and height. They all have to explode. They've all got glass fronts on, so all the glass has to explode out. All the proclamations have to blow out. We do tests for ourselves in the workshop and make sure we've got the look that we think we're going for. Then we show David Yates, get his feedback. Then we do a test on video with 6 proclamations blowing up so that everybody can look at it and see it, and we agree then on the levels of different things that we're going to go with. David Yates wanted the proclamations to rain down like burning confetti afterwards, so we had to put bits of torn up and burnt proclamation in there and then blow those out with small explosive charges which would smash the glass, blow the doors open, generally destroy the whole thing, leaving the air full of smoking, burning paper.
3, 2, 1, go!
And then we had special rigs on the back so that we could make every single proclamation fall off the wall at the same time. We had a separate rig which was controlled by steel cables with special little links that were hidden in the wall, and then the links were released by release hooks at the back of the set so that when we pulled forward, all 70 proclamations fell down. We always said we can do take 2, but it's going to take about 24 hours to re-rig, and we could have done it, but fortunately we didn't have to.
These are slightly different centaurs than you've seen before. We wanted to make them feel very real and organic and not like a fantasy creature, but like a creature that could exist.
On Harry Potter 1, the concept of the centaur was slightly different. On this one, David Yates felt that he wanted to bring a more realistic idea of where these creatures come from. So they would have primitive weaponry, primitive tools. They would be simple but very intelligent creatures.
The reason why they're so complicated, or there's so much going on in them, is that you've got a human body on top of a horse. And at face value, it seems really simple, but if you think about from a CG point of view, there's so many different parts that need to go into it before it starts to look real. The art department created a series of maquettes, or sculptures. The first thing that we do is take a scan of the actual maquette, and then our modeler will go in there and create a life-size version of that on the computer. And then we take it to the next stage, which is painting it. And it's kind of like a model kit. We start putting all the lovely details, such as the veins, all the coloration in there. And then once we are happy with that, we take it to the next step, which is putting hair on there. It's giving all those little touches of realism.
Centaurs have their own language. The 2 centaurs had to have voice training to be able to speak it like that, and it sounds amazing and really aggressive and complicated and intricate.
Now, this gives you an idea of the massive amount of work that goes into something as simple as someone talking. Right here on the screen, we have a series of shapes, and we call them blend shapes. And in total, for all of the centaurs, we have hundreds of blend shapes. So each one of these facial expressions, in other words, if you take your face and you go ooh, ah, ooh, whenever you do that, by default, when you're talking to someone, you're naturally doing that. Obviously, we've got to replicate that on the computer. So we have a very talented modeler who has sat there and gone through these blend shapes or key shapes and sculpted each one of them. So the next step is that we build a tool that our animators can use that enables them to dial the performance in. This is the animation tool that they use to drive the facial expressions on our centaur. At the end of the day, it's always good to base our work on reality. So there were two actors, and this one in particular, which was playing Bane, did a performance of some of the lines that he has in the movie. And these little dots on his face are what we use to track and be able to see the fine, minute detail or the small little subtleties. So based on his performance, we turn around and we go in there and match it to give it the same sort of feeling that the actor had on set. The good thing about something like this is the director gets to go in there and work with the actors to get the performance that he wants. We capture it all on video cameras and turn around and mimic that in the computer. And the other tricky thing is that it's a human face. Right here you can see his nose and all of that. But if you look at the centaur itself, for example, it has an elongated nose, which is definitely more equine than it is human. It's translating that performance from a human into a horsey sort of face is the tricky bit. The two centaurs lifting Umbridge, it's kind of tricky because the actor who plays Umbridge is actually not performing to anyone. She's in a harness in a green screen studio.
3, 2, 1, action.
But even before we get to Umbridge, we've got to do all of this back work. If you actually look at the shot, first of all, what we've got to do, there's a phase in the process called pre-visualization, or previs for short. What that means is that we block out the shots, so we rough out the animation. And what we start with is a plate, which looks like this. Now you can see in the background, that's all blue. We replace that blue with a set extension or matte painting. So that's the next stage in the process. So we've taken out the blue bits in the back now, and we've put in our set extension. The next phase after that is our animation team goes in there and starts to block out the animation of the two centaurs on either side of Umbridge, lifting her up and carrying her off. Now, it looks crude at the time, but the reason it looks that way is that we've got to do this quickly. The whole pre-visualization process is brainstorming in 3D to give the director a better idea of what his shot's going to look like. We block out the entire animation of what's going on in there, and then you see the little pink person, which is Umbridge. They take this, and then they go shoot a green screen element of Umbridge. She's on a green screen set on this harness that mimics the motion of what's going on with our pre-visualization. And you can see right there in that tiny little camera, they're playing back our previs, and they're doing a live mix between that and our pre-visualization. So after that, we go to the next phase, which is taking that Umbridge element and then putting it into our 3D scene with our centaurs. It looks easy, but it really isn't.
The Thestral flight goes from the forests outside of Hogwarts to London. This was kind of one of the most trickier aspects because we have to design a sequence that's eventually going to drive helicopter plates shot in Scotland and a blue screen shoot of the actors.
It takes a lot of forethought. We have to do previs so that you can then put an actor onto something like a Thestral and have it be believable and not have it be flat.
While we're all designing the sequence in terms of the shot design, we were also working on development of the Thestral's motion to figure out how fast they fly, how they flap their wings, and there were animation tests of a Thestral walking to show the gait and the speed. And then those two come together, so the director and team over there have a really sort of clear picture of this is the kind of motion that the characters will have in those shots when everything comes together.
first round of animatic animation was bought off by the director, at which point the animation was transferred back onto a motion control rig, and that rig was put onto stage and the actors would get on it and it would be filmed with them. At that point, the elements would be combined together with original animation and they would be able to line up exactly the way we wanted to see it in the movie.
I think they're going to be impressed by the fact that we've been able to seamlessly put people onto CG characters. I think that in itself hasn't been done to the success that we have accomplished with the Thestral. I mean, you see Harry and Luna riding the Thestral and you truly believe that they're riding it.
Hall of Prophecies is our first ever totally computer-generated set. We've been very dependent previously on very traditional theatrical set-building skills, and so it was quite a departure for us.
The Hall of Prophecy sequence was probably technically our most complex in the entire film. We had to decide how we created this extraordinary environment that J.K. had created in the book. And it's a bit like walking into a huge graveyard, and it goes on for miles. All you see are these extraordinary, strange prophecies that lie dormant, waiting for someone to come and collect them. And so we created this very atmospheric, strange environment of beautiful glass shelves and beautiful sleeping orbs. And what's fantastic about it is it allows you to get great depth and incredible detail.
Harry, it's got your name on it.
Here we see the first shot where Harry and his companions enter the Hall of Prophecy. The only thing that's real in this shot, actual physical real objects that exist in the real world, obviously the actors and the doorway that's behind them. Everything else has been created in the computer. This is the original green screen plate. The orange dots you see there, this is for tracking purposes. By tracking the little dots in the picture, we can then work out where in three-dimensional space the physical camera was on the day when they shot the plate. Then this can be translated into the computer software so we can make a virtual model of the camera, and it moves exactly the same way as the real camera did. And then we put that inside our 3D scene and the two things lock together. What you see here is an early layout of the Hall of Prophecy. And what we've done is we've just made simple models of the shelves, so we've got an idea of the architecture of the scene, which is a very important thing for us to understand how much detail we have to put into it. We call this an animatic or a layout. What you see here is a pretty finished version of the shot. We've added the glass shells, we've added the prophecy spheres, the stands, you can see all the cobwebs and everything. The final version with the primary grade on, you can now see it's all been muted down, all the colours have been balanced, everything's working together. What's been really pleasing is to see the way that all the layers of organic detail, the dust and the dirt and the cobwebs and the very, very subtle lighting design have just brought the whole thing to life, and it really feels like a space that you could walk into.
We have a big wand battle. This is the time that you get to see some Olympic-level ninja wandage.
I brought in a wand choreographer because I watched all the other movies, and what was interesting is there hasn't necessarily up until now been a kind of grammar to spells and spell making. So what I wanted to do was to introduce a kind of series of spells that everybody could use.
I came up with a family, a group of movements from which all of the spells can be fired or all of the spells can be defended. And within the range of those movements, I then built the choreography from that for the battles.
Paul's created this language with these wands. There are certain ways of using the wand and certain movements and a certain physicality.
We've developed a vocabulary, a kind of physical vocabulary for wands, which isn't fencing and it isn't pointing and it isn't dance, but it's something.
What I had to do basically was rehearse all of the actors, take them through the same process as if they'd been to wand training school, and then each of the characters adapted it for their characters, so personalised it basically to make it their own.
One of the lovely things about me fighting Gary is that he's got a kind of street, prison, Azkaban-informed fighting style, and I'm very old school and very formal.
I've probably picked up a few little handy moves along the way.
Everyone had their different styles of wand fighting. I sort of ended up being... I kept on doing like ping-pong sounds.
Me and Gary do a lot of running around in this scene, and we are most certainly regarding ourselves as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, sort of running around and ducking and things. Oh, it's great. It's fantastic fun. I'd like to think I'm Paul Newman, but I'm sure Gary would disagree with me.
Got it!
And action!
The effects in the atrium had to be larger and more spectacular than the previous scenes, and we really wanted to finish on a grand finale between these two great wizards fighting each other. David wanted to feel like the wizards were using things within the set, that they were using elements that they could conjure and turn into more dangerous and powerful spells. We came up with various ideas. The first of which you see that the wands lock together whilst the two are dueling.
This is the initial wand duel where Voldemort and Dumbledore's wand beams collide and create this hot molten sun in the centre as this drippy lava material splatters around and causes a lot of danger and mayhem. You can see here we could have put in little lens flares and things that augment the image and make it a bit more punchy.
The next stage is Voldemort turns fire into a huge 60-foot fiery serpent which towers above Dumbledore.
We built the snake out of this hot liquid magma core, and then we launched flames up over his whole surface, pulling back more off the head so we could reveal features and give a little character. And then we built up flames around the back and revealed areas that looked interesting.
Dumbledore uses the water from the fountain on the set to encase Voldemort into a watery prison, which picks him up and moves him.
To shoot the scenes of Voldemort trapped in the water, one of the things they did was set up a rig for Ralph Fiennes to sit on.
I'm on the top of a sort of metal pole strapped to a kind of pivot that turned around, and I was being tossed around. I was safe, but it took me a few takes to feel how safe it was.
The shots of Voldemort performing against the blue screen are roughly timed and shot according to a bunch of previs we did that show the progression of the water picking him up, starting to spin him, and then holding him and moving him across the room. Once we had those plates, we would do the water simulations on top.
Voldemort breaks out of that, and he basically shatters every single window in the whole of this space and environment, including all of the virtual space where the CG set extension is.
They had a lot of practical office windows exploding on the Ministry of Magic set. They did it multiple ways and shot it from different angles, and a lot of those shots we treated minimally, either adding a little bit of extra dangerous glass towards camera or adding a few additional offices that weren't part of the set. So combining with the live action, so we're trying to hand off and pick up this little insert of the computer graphics version of offices blowing out.
It's a titanic battle at the end of the film. The two greatest wizards the world's ever known. It's a marvellous thing to see.